Good morning and welcome to Daybreak. I'm Kelsey Metzger.
And I'm Chris Hoffman. Kelsey, it's the Halloween season. It's amazing what you find around a college campus now. But coming up on Daybreak, we take an in-depth look at the educational debate and the gubernatorial race.
Plus, Halloween is right around the corner. Like Chris says, we have a few tips and treats in store. Daybreak starts right now.
Good morning, Point Park. The weekend was kind of a little cold and dreary there, Kelsey.
We're in a dreary theme right now, and I really hope we can get out of this rut, Chris.
Yeah, it's really starting to kick in now. It's fall weather. Alex Clements now joins us with your walk out the door forecast.
Well, don't worry, guys. It looks like we're going to have a nice start to next week. Monday morning, we're going to have partly cloudy skies and highs in the upper 60s. Hopefully that warm weather continues. Now over to Emily for national news.
U.S. airplanes are dropping medical supplies and weapons into Kobani to help fighters and civilians protect the city from falling into the hands of ISIS, but it seems the supplies may have done just that. A video posted on social media shows an ISIS fighter next to a parachute bundle. The fighter goes on to show what appears to be the contents of the bundle, including crates of hand grenades and mortar rounds. The Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, announced that the United States would be enforcing travel restrictions to prevent the spread of Ebola. Homeland Security installed more extensive screening measures at 5 airports around the country: New York's JFK, Newark, Dallas, Atlanta, and Chicago. All passengers arriving from Liberia, Sierra Leone, or Guinea will be required to fly into one of the 5 airports with increased screening measures. The travelers must pass the screening before being admitted into the U.S. The White House had another jumper, but this one did not make it quite as far as the previous one. Dominic Adesanya barely made it into the lawn before he was taken down by 2 police dogs and then detained by Secret Service agents. Charges against Adesanya are pending. Authorities caught up with suspected serial killer Darren Dion Van this weekend, and he confessed to killing 7 women in Gary, Indiana. Van led the police to all of the women's bodies in abandoned structures. The suspected serial killer's victims include Africa Hardy, Tiara Beatty, Anith Jones, Kristen Williams, and 3 are unidentified. Van has been to jail twice before on felony convictions. A main issue that has been coming up in the governor race is if and by how much Tom Corbett has cut education. Our own Chris Hoffman breaks down the numbers.
In the last few months, Pennsylvania voters have heard a lot about basic education. Governor Tom Corbett has said he's put money into the budget.
We have now grown the budget back to over $10 billion, and we have put more money into education than any time in the history of education here in Pennsylvania.
While his challenger, Democrat Tom Wolf, has said Governor Corbett has actually taken money away from basic education.
$1 billion was cut from education in Governor Corbett's first term, and that's the truth.
Each candidate says he is speaking the truth. So, Point News decided to look into the matter, and here's what we found. Now here's the state budget in the last year of Governor Ed Rendell, 2010-2011, and the first year of Governor Tom Corbett. In his last year, Ed Rendell had set aside $5.77 billion in basic education. Now only $4.73 billion of it was from the state budget. The rest was federal stimulus money. Governor Tom Corbett in his first year had $5.35 billion set aside for basic education, all of which was state money. So Governor Tom Corbett is actually accurate in saying his administration put forth more state money toward education.
Now, we've replaced it. We're above to the highest level ever if we're talking state dollars.
But if you add the total money, state and federal, that goes into education now compared to 4 years ago, Corbett has actually spent less on education than his Democratic predecessor. Tom Wolf also argues that money now isn't going into the classroom, but instead into teacher pension funds.
we still, in terms of what's going into the classroom, we're still down by $580 million.
Reporting for Point News, I'm Chris Hoffman. Now, Kelsey, we looked at the numbers there, and you see a lot of the big stuff has been basic education in this election.
That's right. That's been a huge issue, as you said, and Chris just broke down the numbers for us. James Hill joins us again this week as the election comes pretty close to around the corner.
Yeah, guys, something else I just want to touch up on that Emily mentioned the other day, those two Secret Service dogs, Hurricane and Jordan, they actually got punched in the face. They were checked out by the veterinarians, but they're going to be okay and are back in the service. But Chris, something you did mention a lot about is how much education is talking about. Before me and you get into that, we're just going to recap something else that you've talked about that we've seen as we entered the last couple weeks of this race here. Well, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, they put up a new thing talking about whether Facebook could help determine who's going to win a race. If we're looking at pure Facebook statistics, as we take on the first graphic you guys are going to see, you're going to see it's going to be a map of our Commonwealth here, and it's going to be shaded with the general colors that we have here in our state. We all know that pretty much Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania tend to be a Democratic area. You can see the little spot of blue on your lower left-hand side. That is, of course, Allegheny County in the city of Pittsburgh. Little spot of blue over on the right-hand side, that's Philadelphia County. All of the red is, of course, those who flow Republican. The blue is those who flow Democratic. You can see the very dark blue are the highest levels of Democratic judgment there in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. And the lighter blue shows the areas that still manage to support the Democrats to a lesser extent. Moving on to the next graphic, though, it was a screenshot actually that Facebook has provided that actually breaks down the amount of people who, according to Facebook, are talking about, commenting, liking, and sharing those of each of the candidates. Well, only about 35,000 people were actually on Tom Wolf's. Wait, Chris, you know how much those names get me. 35,000 are on Tom Corbett's. Over 75,000 are actually on Tom Wolf's. But when it comes to actual posts that people are talking about, there have been 14,000 posts just talking about Tom Wolf and 11,000 posts talking about Governor Corbett. Chris, you did talk about all this federal stimulus here and how we've gotten into it. And I just want to start talking to you with that and how our school districts are starting to, recover from this and what this additional revenue is going to go to. One of the big things we're talking about is here in our own city. The example I'm going to use is the Pittsburgh Public School District. It is a school district of roughly 28,000 people, founded in 1794, and it has an annual revenue budget of about $542,000 to $600,000 there. They've actually received a deficit of nearly $20 million from the education funding in our state. And they're saying that once they get some of this funding back, it's going to help them put it more directly to the students. Like you mentioned, Chris, in the billions that we've seen Governor Corbett take away, 2006, we only had about $4.7 billion in government spending there. That was still under Ed Rendell's turn. 2007, 4.9. 2008, 5.2. In 2009, that's when we started seeing the first of that federal stimulus, $5.5 billion in funding towards our school systems. However, you talked about this, Chris, only about $1.1 billion actually came from the federal stimulus. The rest dropped it actually back under $5 billion, 2010, the last year of Governor Rendell, an extra $1.5 million in federal stimulus, bringing it up to $5.7 million. Then Governor Corbett's first year, it dropped back down to about 5.3, a little bit towards 5.2 as that federal stimulus expired. So, Chris, I just have questions for you. Governor Corbett, if he does get re-election, you think he'd be forced to be committed to raising funding?
I think he might have to be forced to raise funding there, James. Now, how do you think he's going to be able to raise enough funding to fill the void that still has been left from the federal stimulus money? Because if you look at the 4 years of Governor Corbett, if you add up the money that's, if you compare the last year of Governor Ed Rendell to the 4 years of Governor Corbett, that's the $1 billion that Tom Wolf is talking about that's missing. How does one of the governors, whoever gets elected, fill that void and get them back over top that $5.7 billion?
Well, Tom Wolf, he's been pretty clear about his intention to tax our natural gas industries, our shale industries, our shacking industries. There we go. Governor Corbett, he really hasn't shelled out exactly what he's planning to do. He plans to probably just, at least in his words, bring more money from the state. Of course, everyone's saying that Tom Wolf, he has plans to raise taxes without any explanation. So if he gets it and he does end up raising taxes, he's going to have more money and more revenue to help our school systems out as well. Because I think we can both agree, Chris, the foundation of any great society is, of course, the education of its children.
Absolutely there, James. Now, another thing you touched base on is social media. That's something we haven't really seen come up too much
you really haven't.
in these gubernatorial elections the last couple times around. Now, how big of a factor has it been for this upcoming election for 2014?
Well, I mean, although, you know, they're saying Facebook is dying as more parents get on it, it still really is something that's a representative of the millennials. And the fact that Tom Wolf, you know, he has 60-some thousand more likes on his Facebook page than Governor Corbett, it's actually quite remarkable and a little bit impressive. Although we all know it's not going to have a dramatic increase, it really does just beef up the awareness that people have of Tom Wolf. You know, young people, they might not be as familiar with Governor Corbett because they're not seeing his ads, you know, his likes, his shares going through their pages. So while it might not necessarily have a dramatic increase on the actual outcome of the race, it simply brings up more awareness, and Facebook's free. I mean, you know, free publicity for Tom Wolf.
Absolutely. Now, real quick before we get a break,
Yeah.
do you think with all this social media that we'll get more younger people out there voting?
Well, you know, Chris, I'd really hope so. Real quick, like you mentioned, federal elections in this country rarely turn out about 1/3 of the population. The last presidential election, about 130 million people voted. You know, there's 350 million people, not 350 people in this nation. So our elections, they rarely do turn out large portions. We can only hope that this gets young people more involved in our government, because when it comes to it, you know, it really is up to us to elect the leaders that we are given.
Absolutely right there, James. Now, just don't forget, the election is November 4th.
Yes.
Coming up on Daybreak, last week we told you how USG slashed funds. See which clubs received supplemental funding. And the World Series is underway. It's the big market team in San Francisco against the smart market team that could, the Kansas City Royals. The Daybreak Sports Report is coming up.